thought I could figure it out, but maybe I can't. Too bad. Okay, great. Well, we'll get ready. It's about 5:32 and we wanted to get the meeting started at 5:30. So I want to respect your time. We've got a few slides to get through. So I'm sure we'll have some other people joining us as we go. But thanks everybody for coming and joining in for the Montana Creek Recreation Area Master Plan meeting. We have started this process about a year ago in August of 21. We kicked it off with a general public survey and got a lot of responses. Since that time, we've been meeting with user groups and we've been working through project goals and we've gotten lots of good feedback. We've gathered a lot of data that we're going to show you tonight. And we're just starting on concept design. So we have a draft plan that we'll show you. It's the very beginning. We're here to get your comments and your feedback. And then we'll go back to the drawing table and revise and keep working on it. So the format for tonight is a webinar format. So you'll see that there's a Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. You can put questions into that box. We're gonna talk for a little bit and go through some slides, and then we'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. But if you think of questions as we go, please put them into the box. I would say if you have any comments at the end of the presentation, we'll give you an email address, and that's where you should make your comments. Anything that goes into Q&A is not going to be recorded as public comment, but if you email us, that will be recorded and documentation of your comments. So we ask that comments go by email, and again, I'll show you that email at the end of the slideshow. And then questions you have that we can address, do our best to address tonight, you can put into the Q&A box. So I think we'll just get started with some introductions, and then we'll move through the agenda with some of the background of how we got to where we're at, our process goals, what we've heard, themes of what we heard from the public, and then we'll show you the draft plan and talk about next steps. So I actually don't think I introduced myself. I'm Michelle Elfers. I'm the Deputy Director of Parks and Recreation with the City and Borough of Juneau. But I'll talk a little bit more about CBJ and our management intent and involvement in the process in a minute. But first, I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Transportation so that they can introduce themselves. Joanne, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, Michelle. Yes. And thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I'm Joanne Schmidt, and I'm a multimodal surface planner with the Department of Transportation here in Juneau. I've been with DOT for 8 years.
Great, thank you. And we have TrailMix, who's been working with us through this process. So Ryan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan O'Shaughnessy. I'm the Executive Director at TrailMix Incorporated. TrailMix, as I think everyone knows, is not a land manager, but has been a longstanding partner to these land management agencies, helping to carry out comprehensive plans like this one and other plans and execute the action items within them. So happy to be here and happy to be finding some community solutions to and recreation opportunities in the Montana Creek area.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And then we'll have the Forest Service. We've got a couple of folks from the Forest Service, and I've changed the slide, so I just want to show you, I've introduced a map on the right, and that map just shows you the project area boundary. The turquoise lines, the boundary, and then the brown land that has hatching is land managed by the Forest Service. So I'll turn it over to Tristan and Pete to introduce themselves.
All right, good afternoon. Tristan Fluharty, I'm the District Ranger for the Juneau Ranger District. Really appreciate all the work that everybody's put into the process so far, and I'm really excited about the interagency approach to planning for this area. And I'll turn it over to Pete.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pete Schneider. I am the Recreation Staff Officer for the Juneau Ranger District, and I've been with the Forest Service on the Juneau District for a little over 20 years now. So excited to be a part of this process as well. Excited to see some planning to take place out there. Obviously, lots of vested interest in how this use takes place year round. Lots of opportunities. So excited to be a part of this. Thanks.
Thanks, Tristan and Pete. Let's see. Then we have the State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources. Megan, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Hillgartner, and I'm a Natural Resource Manager with the Department of Natural Resources within the Division of Mining, Land, and Water. And I just want to start off also by thanking you, Michelle, for coordinating this effort and bringing us all together to kind of start the process of crafting a collective community vision for this area that's clearly so important to so many people. Thank you.
Great, thanks. As you can see with the slides, I've put up slides for the Forest Service, the Department of Natural Resources, and you'll see this next one is with the City and Borough of Juneau. This shows the agencies that manage the largest areas of land in the project area. The DOT also has a small area. We'll show you that later in a different map. They manage the bridge over Montana Creek and a portion of the road that goes through CBJ property. And there's management intent that's set out in documents, and we'll show you some of those documents a little bit later, but this is just a little bit of a capture of what some of that management intent is. So as I said, I'm Michelle Alfers. I'm with Parks and Recreation. Also on the panel, we have Colby Scheibler. He is our Parks and Landscape Maintenance Supervisor, and he has been helping with the project team as well. And just to give you a little overview for how we manage park area within the park, because most of this area is park. It's a natural area park. Designated as a conservation area, which means that it's recognized for high environmental value, and that we should protect and conserve that environmental value. Recreation is a secondary objective. These areas typically have some kind of open space, water value, and in this case, of course, it's Montana Creek, and our intent is to protect and manage the natural environment. So that just gives you a brief overview as to where we all come from on the project team, and the intent for land management as laid out in plans from all of our respective agencies. So I'll get a little bit into the background for the project and how it started. And I'm sure some of you on the call were part of this. A couple years ago, there was a request by the Juneau Nordic Ski Club to, in the winter, close a portion of Montana Creek Road to motorized use. So as many of you know, we have a gate right after the Hank Harmon Public Range, and in the wintertime, we close it. We also close it in the evenings during the summer. But in the wintertime, when we close it, it becomes a recreation area that's groomed by the Nordic Ski Club, but it's also accessible for motorized use. And the Nordic Ski Club asked the city if it could be closed to motorized use to allow them to continue and enhance their grooming operations and their use. And so we went out to public comment and got more public comment than I think we've ever gotten on any other project with Parks and Rec. And we realized that there's a lot of people using this area and a lot of people that really care about it, and that we needed to put some energy into understanding those uses. And through the comment, we also realized that probably the infrastructure that we have for this area is not adequate to meet the needs, and it's only growing the use. And so we really need to start thinking about that infrastructure, how people use this area, how they access it. We're starting to see issues with especially parking, safety along the road, and user conflict. So that really started to tip us off to we need to figure out a plan and a process here. And that was the inception for this project. In addition to that, around the same time and after, among the agencies, we started hearing ideas for the area for new things to do. Like I said, use seems to be increasing. So We've heard things like biathlon range and more trails. There was a application for a motorized trail on DNR land at that time. There were requests for new trails through the project area, cabins, as we already talked about, more parking and issues related to parking and access. So it was a lot, and it was coming at us quickly. And it's, you probably know, as agencies, we have a hard time moving fast. So we started talking and started meeting and decided that an organized public process and kind of a deliberate plan for the area is really what's needed. And that is what kicked off this project. So some of the goals that we talked about were to create the master plan with a horizon of 10 years. Which isn't a very long horizon. Some planning projects you'll see have 30-year horizons, but this is a plan for primarily for infrastructure. So, you know, thinking about what we can do in the near future and what our needs are now. So identifying recreational facilities. When I use the word facility, think really broadly about that. A facility could be a trail, it could be open grassy space, it could be a toilet, it could be a parking area. So what do we need as amenities and facilities for the recreation and for the uses and the protection of this area? And then also thinking about coordinated planning and management among the agencies, as you can see from this project area map. And as you've heard, there's lots of land managing agencies, and you'll hear more about how different regulations can be, and it's confusing and it's complicated. So I'm doing a better job at coordinating and moving forward together cooperatively is important. And just through the process we've had in this year, we've already been doing a lot of that. And I think starting to see some of the benefit from that cooperation. So what we did last August was we kicked off the project with a public use survey, or a public survey, excuse me. And we got a lot of responses, over 1,000, which was pretty exciting. The word cloud on the right is just, we always ask for one word that people think of when they think of the area. So it's kind of fun to see what people replied. This survey is, there's a report, and that has all the comments verbatim in the report. It has pie charts and graphs, and pulls out kind of themes from the comments. It's all on our project webpage. So I definitely encourage everybody to go there and to take a look at it. The project webpage is here, but if you just navigate to the city website and go to Parks and Recreation Department, on the lower right side is something that says current projects. Montana Creek master plan is right there. Click on that. And on that project webpage, you'll see the survey report. You're going to see all the documents that we're going to show you, all the resources that I'm going to show you in this meeting. The slideshow is up there right now that I'm showing you, and the draft plans. So you can also refer to those right now on your computer and go back to those later if that's helpful to you. So I just have one or two slides on the survey, but we really took the information from the survey to start planning our process. So the data we got helped us figure out how to move forward in the process. It really formed the foundation for where we're at today. So one of the things that we took from it, or we asked about challenges in the area, what people thought were challenges, and complex land management regulation was on the top, confusing to people. And, you know, along those lines, lack of signage, not really understanding where you are when you're in the space. Are you on Forest Service land? Are you on state land? Safety concerns, some were, you know, about natural aspects like bears and landslides, things like that. Some of the safety concerns related to being more remote. You know, there's not a lot of people there. I think remote can be looked as a challenge or an opportunity. If you look on the other side of the page and the values, you know, remote shows up, that idea of remote in a few places with quiet and wilderness experience, and that can be really looked at as a value, but also can be a source of concern for people. And then we heard a lot about user conflict, which we had started to hear about already, lack of trust between groups, and then lots of ideas. And I think diverse ideas can be a challenge and they can be an opportunity, but lots of ideas on how the area should be used and what should be done there. So I think the values are kind of interesting to look at too, what people like about this area. As I already mentioned, remote can be a value, and all the activities people do here are also important to the community. One thing I want to focus everybody on is snow. One of the things we learned early on when we were looking at the Montana Creek Road issue is that this area is really valued in the winter. Probably has the most intense use in the winter time, and the most people in the project area in the winter time as well. And what we learned is it's in a valley, so it holds cold air longer, meaning the snow season at low elevation is longer than in other areas of town. And of course, for people who like recreating in the winter, that's really important because it's pretty easily accessible from the Mendenhall Valley, which has dense residential areas. So getting to snow quickly is easier at Montana Creek versus driving up to Eagle Crest, where you get up into the higher elevation, but it takes much longer. So winter access and winter use is really important, and you're going to see that as we move through the presentation and the concept plan. So from that public survey, we then contacted user groups, and this is a list of the groups that we contacted, and we've contacted them and emailed them over the past year for various meetings. And we've asked those groups to send representatives to some meetings and then to contact their membership and keep them updated. Not all of these groups participated, but most of them did. There's just a few that didn't get back to us or didn't participate in any way, but they were all contacted. In those meetings that we had last fall, we sat down with the groups. We asked specific questions about their vision for the area, their use of the area, opportunities they saw, what they wanted in a process for a master plan, and what they wanted in an end product. And we took that information to start to develop how we were going to move through the master plan process. And one of the things we heard was we need some more data on the area. There's a lot of existing data already, and let's put that together and look at it. So I'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to first talk about the themes. So from the public survey and from our user group meetings, we got a lot of information, a lot of input, and organized it by themes. And actually most of the feedback we got fell into the themes that I'm going to show you on the next couple slides. And I want to talk through them because I think it's really important to understand the themes as a context when you look at the draft master plan, because it's really based on what we heard from everybody. So first one is connections. It's a big area, but it also connects to other areas that are already developed. So if you think about this area, to the kind of northeast, you have the Mendenhall Glacier Recreation area. So we heard make connections to that area. There's already developed trails. There's a big master plan process going on there to develop that area. There's also Montana Creek. That's on the other side of Back Loop Road, and the wetlands and the trail system that goes to the Caxtagugu Trail that we can make connections to. There's also, if you go up towards Windfall Lake, you can connect over to Eagle Beach, over to the Amalga Recreation area. So how can we make those connections so that people can travel through all those areas and use all those recreation areas? We also heard about an interest in loop trails, which just in terms of trail work around town, everybody loves loop trails. I love loop trails. They're more fun. So we heard there's a big desire for those. Access goes a little bit hand in hand with connections but it's a little bit broader than that too. So you can think about access as getting to a place and getting into a place. So how do you arrive? If you're in a car, you park. If you're on your bike, what do you do with that? And how do you get into the area? And so we need to look at access and have better access and parking. There's also access within an area. So the Montana Creek Recreation Area has steep slopes and mountains and wetlands that you can't really get across unless you have waders and you want to swim in the summertime. And there's a big river. So how do you move through an area and have access through that area in a safe and sustainable way. And then we heard about extending Lake Creek Road to Spaulding Meadow, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's an idea for access. Again, like we talked about winter access, right? More year round, or sorry, extending the winter season into the fall, earlier in the fall and later in the spring. So extending Lake Creek Road would be a way to do that, to allow people to get to higher elevations where there's snow. And then people wanting more motorized access and people wanting more groomed trails for skiing. We heard a lot about shelters, day use shelters, overnight public use cabins, camping, different ways to stay in and use the area. And that is close and connected to kids and families and subsistence. We heard a lot about that as well too. Lots of families said it's hard to bring kids into this area, which I think is probably connected to the access problem. Discovery Southeast put in a lot of really good comments throughout, like all of our user groups, but in this area, a couple of them stuck out in terms of, you know, kids come and they bring kids into this area, and really they can get about a mile or so into the area. So thinking about how to have the facility so people can get in there, but also have that experience of natural experience and within that edge zone that people can use. And I think, you know, when you think about berry picking and other subsistence activities too, so more people can do that. How do we get people in, but then allow those activities that aren't too far off of those access areas, so lots of people can engage in those activities. And a couple other things, maintenance was a big one. You know, a lot of the existing infrastructure and the trails need work. We need funding to maintain those trails. We need more durable materials. You know, it's a dynamic environment. There was landslides on the Montana Creek Trail this year. We've got lots of great user groups and volunteers that help us with that. How can we design for durability of our existing infrastructure? And then we talked about complex management and rules and regulations that aren't very clear. So do a better job at that and enforcement of those rules. Lots of comments on separated and shared use of trails. That's you know, a big topic. I think a lot of communities do it really well. I was in Moab this last year and got to see their trail systems and how they have a very sophisticated system of separated and shared use. So looking at how we can do that here. And then of course, environmental protection. If you remember the management intent for the three main land managing agencies, you know, all recognize environmental values in this area. So recognizing areas of sensitive habitat, minimizing footprints of, you know, facilities and development, looking really closely at how those facilities, how our trails come into riparian areas, moving those away when we can as we go through and maintain these trails, relocating trails. We did this recently, Trail Mix did this on the Schweitzer system in Lemon Creek. We went through and relocated the Richard Marriott Trail away from the salmon stream because there's a lot of erosion happening. It was right on the bank. Dogs are entering the creek. There's salmon there. There's bears. So we relocated the trail away from it. So looking at how we can do that along the Montana Creek, along Montana Creek as well, and some of the other main tributaries to protect those waterways. And then of course, lots of support for archery, fishing, hunting, and shooting. We have a couple recreational facilities, the Hank Harmon Public Range, the archery range is there. Territorial Sportsman was a participant in this process. They had lots of good comments on families and kids as well. So how can we continue to support those activities in this area? So those are a lot of themes, but hopefully you'll see them as we get into the draft plan. And it really has formed the basis on listening to the public and listening to our user groups. That's formed the basis for how we move forward. One of the other things we heard, as I started to mention earlier, was that we should gather some data. There's a lot of existing data already in this area, and that can help inform a planning process and a design process. So we created an online GIS database. And so it's open to the public. The link is right here, and I just did a screenshot for you to see what it looks like. It's the same web page that I explained before. So you navigate to the city website, you go to the Parks and Recreation page. On the lower right, under current projects, you'll see Montana Creek Master Plan. Click on that. And this, I think it's called like the data mapper or something like that. Click on that link and you'll get to this mapper. You can see some of the layers that are in there. You can turn things on and off. It might take you a little while to get used to it, but there's lots of data. So, you know, as you're thinking about, I really like to see in this in this area, I wouldn't like to see this, go into that mapper and look at, turn some layers on and off and see if your idea works. And that's the idea of this, right? Oh, there's, you know, I think we have some wetlands that were mapped by the Nature Conservancy in here. And we also have LiDAR data for topography, you know, like, oh, I have this great idea, but it's on a, you know, 75% slope. Maybe it won't work there, you know, so, you know, we've been going to this and referencing this as we're looking at some of the planning ideas in this area. And I think it's a really good tool that's going to be even more helpful as we move forward into the design process. One more piece of the data gathering, this again, we heard from user groups, was that there's a lot of existing plans out there already from the community about this area. And some of these plans are, they're more general and broad, like the comprehensive plan, of course, is very broad. And even the Parks and Rec master plan is, but they mention Montana Creek. I mean, they mentioned some of these values and recreational activities in those plans, so they're important to recognize. And then we have some really great specific plans that community groups have developed on this area, and they have a ton of good information. So, you know, we can take these plans, we can take that information, and we can build on it as we start thinking about this area. So all of these plans are linked on our webpage. They're all listed out, and you could just click on it and you'll get right to the plan. So please do that. Lots of good nighttime reading. It'll keep you busy for a long time. Okay, so another piece of data gathering is the Motorized Use Regulation. So as I mentioned, we figured out that a lot of people were confused on existing regulations for the area. And that's because they are confusing, as we also learned. So one of the things we tried to do in this process, and this probably took us the longest of any of the pieces, was pulling together these maps. These maps are on the project website. I know that they're hard to see on this screen, and my intent is not to go through them thoroughly on this meeting, but I do want to briefly go through them because I think it's important to understand what's in these maps so you can understand kind of the context for the draft master plan that we'll show you in a little bit. So with these maps, what we did is we divided them into summer use versus winter use. So there's two categories of maps, and that's primarily because the Forest Service manages most of the land in this area, and their regulations are really different in summer versus winter. So what I have up is the summer map, which is probably the simpler one to understand. It's April 16th to December 14th. The purple, the dark purple, is all Forest Service managed land. And in the summertime, this area is closed to motorized vehicles, except you see this little road that has hatching on it. That's yellow hatching. That's the 25-mile road across from Amalga Harbor. And there's a little section of road that's open to motorized use during the summer. This hatched area here, that's Department of Natural Resources. This is state land where you see the hatched. This area, motorized use in the summer is generally allowed, but there's conditions on that. We don't have all the conditions on this map, but there's a reference at the bottom to what these regulations are. And so, for example, there's conditions related to impacts from that use. And there's also a permitting process for building trails on state land. And I also we included in the bottom, Alaska Department of Fish and Game has a permit process as well for crossing on Anadromous creeks. So, so there's a lot of parameters to motorized use in that land, but there are some opportunities under certain conditions and when needed through permitting processes. The light purple here is city land. This area is parkland. There's no motorized use in parkland, except you'll see Montana Creek Road runs that land. So this is just a regular vehicular road people drive on. At the end of that road is the Montana Creek Bridge. This is the section that DOT manages, that bridge and that road. And this, it's a road, but it looks more like a trail because there's a bridge that cars can't cross. And so motorized use is allowed to the end of that road. It's only a few hundred feet before you get to the end of CBJ land right there and the DOT managed land. So there's a couple little exceptions in here. So that's the summer time overview. And then this is the winter time. And again, I know it's hard to read, but please, if you want to look on the website and you can look at these in much more detail. It takes a lot of time, I think, to digest them. So for winter, we're talking December 15th to April 15th. So again, the Forest Service manages most of the land in this area. The dark purple, the two dark purple blobs you see, those are Forest Service managed areas. Those areas have no motorized use in the winter. The area here that's in the middle that has the yellow hatching kind of in two directions, that's Forest Service managed land as well. And in the wintertime during these dates, it's open to over snow vehicles and vehicles 50 inches or less in width. But the ground has to be frozen with at least 12 inches of snow. So what that means, and there's some language in the map that explains it. Over snow vehicles are basically vehicles designed for snow that have tracks or skis. So think snowmobiles, right? This is where the snowmobile club and the snowmobile users come up in the wintertime and they snowmobile in this area. You know, and they have certain conditions. And my understanding is the Forest Service and the snowmobilers work together really well in the winter, understanding when the conditions are right. And then they head up and they can use that area. Vehicles 50 inches or less in width can also use that area. Think, you know, ATVs and four-wheeler type vehicles. They can come up this Lake Creek Trail, which is yellow, use that area. They can continue on the trail over towards Windfall Lake in certain snow conditions. And then also this 25-mile road can be used by snowmobiles or ATVs in the winter. This other area that's Forest Service with just the hatching that goes, you know, from upper right to lower left, that area is open to over snow vehicles when the ground is frozen in 12 inches or less. So that means that, as I described, over snow vehicles are basically snow machines, vehicles designed for snow with tracks or skis. It's not open to vehicles 50 inches in width or less, which is ATVs. So details, nuances, I know it's complicated, but again, important to understand for what we're going to look at later. DNR land is this section right here. The uses are the same in the winter or the summer. I'm not going to go through that again. It's on the maps if you want to look at it. CBJ land, same, parkland and DOT. Same uses except on CBJ land. If you remember, we closed the gate after the Hank Harmon Public Range in the winter. We had a lot of dumping problems, so that's why we do that. So from that gate to the end of the road, there is motorized access, but not for things like pickup trucks, but things like snowmobiles and ATVs can get through our fence and use that for recreational purposes. Okay, I think I've covered that for just generally what I think will be helpful for looking at the draft plan. Okay, so basically the information that we've taken you through up to this point, the public survey, the data in the comments, all the user group meetings we had last fall where we asked some questions and got data, the resource mapping, the GIS database, and the existing plans. And then I haven't yet mentioned, but we also did a design workshop for user groups in the spring. So we took all that information and we talked to that list of organizations that I put on the screen before. And we invited them all to bring a couple representatives actually to our park maintenance shop, and we had big tables with really big maps. You can see one of them in the background on the wall. We said, okay, let's start drawing like here's what we heard from people, think about what your interests are, and let's get this down on these maps. The Nordic Ski Club did a lot of work before that meeting and came up with some nice plans on what they'd like to see. So we took that and we looked at it in those plans for new trails and existing trails. And we got some good plans and we got some good ideas. So we took those plans from that user group design workshop and then all the information that I've mentioned, and that's what we put into these draft plans. So it was quite a long process, but remember, these are concept plans and it's just a start. So we're here to show you, we'd like to hear from you and get your input, and then we can go back and, work on design development. Okay, so here's the overall draft plan. I know it's hard to see so much on a small screen. This plan is now on the project website. So if you want to click over to that, you can pull it up on your screen and zoom in. It might be easier. In a minute, I'm going to show you an inset. The next slide is an inset of this lower area because there's a lot going on. So I'll probably talk about the details in this lower area on the next slide, and you'll be able to see it a little bit better. The thing I want you to, what I want everyone to understand on these plans is that this is a winter use plan because we heard so much about winter use and that the value in this area is so much for winter recreation. And that's really when we're seeing the complex and the intense use that we really focus the plan on winter use. And we also assumed that there are no changes in regulations. I think that there may be some people on this meeting, and we've heard from people that there is interest in changing some regulations, and that's totally possible in the future. But for the purposes of getting a plan together to present, we're assuming no changes. That's something that would be really good in your input. It's something that will require process and time. So if we get that kind of input, we can look into what that process would be, and we can communicate that out. This is a 10-year planning horizon, or this plan is a 10-year plan. So we want to look at if there's ways that we can accomplish what the goals of the community are soon and in existing regulations, that's great. And that's what our first crack at the plan is. So keep that in mind. And that's partly why I really wanted to explain the motorized use regulations, because I think it's important to understand what we have now and what the plan is based on. So a couple themes I put here on the slide that I'll talk about are improved access, loop trails, cabins with a hut-to-hut system, clear regulations, unified signage. I'll just walk you through briefly the legend of this plan so you understand. These kind of dark pink lines with a black outline that are solid, these are existing trails. So they're trails we already have. You'll recognize Montana Creek Trail, John Muir, Off New, Peterson Lake, and up at the top, Windfall Lake. So those are existing. The dashed pink lines are new proposed trails that are designed and dedicated to non-motorized uses. So hiking, biking, skiing trails. Some of these, and we'll talk about this in a minute, make connections to outside areas, new connections. The yellow dashed lines, these are new or proposed motorized use trails. So they would be designed for motorized use, but they could be multi-use. And in some areas they would, and I'll talk about those in a minute, it would probably be wider to accommodate that multi-use. The green cabins are new proposed cabins. The gray ones are existing. So we have 3 existing cabins in the project area already. 2 green ones are proposed. They're located, so they're on the edge of the motorized use area. So again, this is a winter map. In the winter, those 2 cabins could be accessed in the right conditions by snowmobiles or ATVs. And then you can see here, there's an effort to create loop systems throughout the project area. And I do want to point out, this is an interesting trail connection here from Peterson Lake over to the new proposed cabin, and then 25 Mile Road. What this would do is you'd have the connection that exists from 25 Mile Road along a trail that was designed for motorized use in the winter. You could connect to a new cabin You could continue through the Spaulding Meadow motorized use area, go to the cabin down by Lake Creek Trail. You could also continue to the Windfall Lake cabin. If you were skiing or you were hiking in the winter or snowshoeing, you could also do that loop. You would come up to Peterson Lake. There would be a non-motorized trail. Then this would be a multi-use trail right here. So motorized and non-motorized. So we'd really have to look carefully at the design of that and make sure that we accommodate all uses, but that would allow access to this trail and this other trail system to get to Windfall Lake. In the summertime, again, the regulations would be as they are now, where there's no motorized use through most of the area except on the 25-mile road. So the summertime would be different, but in the winter it would open up some access to the cabins and the trails. I'm going to move over just to the inset a little bit because there's a lot of detail in here that's hard to see on the other map. So I mentioned some connections to other areas, and this is things we've heard from some of the user groups and the public. So this pink line that goes from close to the Hank Harmon Public Range over to the Mendenhall Glacier Trails, we'd have a connection here. Just be aware that there's kind of an arc around the range that's a clear zone just for safety for firing. So we really have to stay out of this upper area. So thinking about how the trails can connect around that safety zone. But we think we could probably make a connection here that would get, up to the road. And then looking at parking, we've talked about needing more parking. So this Montana Creek area is one of our main accesses to the area and really, really popular in the winter. So looking ahead, we do think we need a larger parking area and possibly some facilities there. So we think about what we talked about with, kids and families access, what kind of amenities can we have there where, maybe there's a day use shelter, a little picnic shelter at the trailhead and a parking area and a vault toilet and some good signage and, maybe early in the trails, we really focus on ADA accessible trails, into the area. So thinking about the trailheads, having some amenities to allow for better access and better services for people to get into the area. We also have a proposed parking area down by Auk Bay Elementary with the Auk New Trail, expanding that parking area a little bit, and a connection. It's actually all along CBJ land. We could connect Auk Bay Elementary School to the Auk New Trail system, which I think Discovery Southeast suggested that. I think that's a really excellent idea and makes a lot of sense for a really valuable connection. Here in the Lake Creek area, this is a big idea that's been around for many years and came up in this process. And so as we talked about, there's interest in extending the winter season, earlier in the fall to access the snow and later in the spring. And so the idea here is that Lake Creek Road, right now there's a parking lot right off of the road, and then there's a gate. And so snowmobiles and ATVs access the motorized use area along the trail. But with, more rains predicted in this area, we're getting less snow at lower elevation. So looking at actually making this a road into, in the winter, so building a road that a vehicle can drive up, a parking area at a higher elevation where you can park, and then the trail starts from that point. So you get a little higher and you have snow sticking around for longer, so you can access this area longer. So as I said, that idea has been around for a long time, and I think is a key component to accessing the proposed system of cabins that are accessible with motorized use. And then again, just as we mentioned before, the environmental values, thinking about that as it overlays on all of these plans, as we look at trail development, looking at where our streams are and our sensitive habitats, and making sure that our impacts are minimal, that we're moving away from the riparian areas of streams where we can, and also that we're looking at protecting subsistence activities and areas where we can. And let's see, I think I've covered the main topics on the draft plan. I'm sure there'll be some more questions. And like I said, please jump on the website and look at these plans because there's a lot of detail in them that I think will be interesting to look at. So in a minute, we're going to move into our answering some questions. So please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. And we'll get to them, and we'll, as a group, do our best to answer those questions. If you do have comments, I said this in the beginning of the meeting, but I'll say it again. Please send your comments to parks.rec@juneau.org, and that's where we will connect and collect and document your written public comment. Anything that goes into the Q&A box isn't going to be documented. Those are just for the purposes of discussion in this meeting. So please do send in your comments. We'll take comments for about a month. That's really just we'll take comments anytime, of course, but to keep the process moving along, we want to have a defined comment period so that we can take those comments, look back at the draft plan, revise it, and get something back out to the public. One thing that I'm particularly interested in, if you have comments on process and what you would like to see, what you think the next step is. I doubt we're going to hear everybody say the plan's perfect, I love it, it's done. And I bet people are going to have lots of ideas. So if you think, hey, I'd love a design workshop, or I'd love another meeting, or just email me the plan, anything on process and next steps would be helpful, because we're going to take your comments to plot our next phase of this master plan process. But before we get to that, I do want to open up the floor again for all of our project team. I think everybody, a few folks have ideas on, next steps from their perspective and their agency. And if there's anything else they want to add that I missed or that you want to highlight, I want to open it up to that. So maybe we'll start with Tristan and Pete. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, you mentioned the planning process we're going through out at MGRA, and I just wanted to distinguish the difference in where we're at with this project and the MGRA process. The master planning process is a valuable information gathering and planning tool, but it does not meet all of our requirements for the National Environmental Policy Act. We would still have to, at the end of this, take any projects that we're going to move forward with through our NEPA process and go through that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, so we weren't establishing any expectations that we really wouldn't be able to meet as far as timeliness of being able to respond to this.
Thanks, Tristan. Let's see. Megan, did you want to add anything?
That was a great presentation, Michelle. No, I don't have anything to add. I think I was going to give a recap of kind of the state's involvement, how we first became involved in this process early on, but I think you captured that really well with kind of highlighting, the different user groups in the area and the interest in the area. So a lot of folks probably do know that our office had received an easement application back in early 2021 for those state kind of isolated state-owned parcels near the Montana Creek paved road. The applicant since has requested that we put that application in suspense status until we kind of ironed out this master plan process and kind of see what folks really want out in that area. And so I don't have any updates or any comments on that, but thank you. That was a really good presentation.
Great, thanks. Joanne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And that was a really great presentation. A lot of information, and I have been around for a bit, participating in some of these meetings, and I could tell from the beginning, and I can tell now that there was a lot of effort put into bringing together the different user and interest groups, which is really such a key component to having a plan that has some depth and breadth to it. Now, insofar as we are a landowner and manager in this area, it is rather limited. And as we had discussed previously, DOT certainly is always interested in supporting efforts to increase access for multimodal transportation and diverse user groups, and equity is always important. I know we've talked previously about this, that DOT really feels like, holding on to the assets that we have in this area, which is fairly limited, segment of roadway and the bridge. It's not in the best interest of the state because it's not, really providing access from one primary point to another, like downtown area to an airport or a ferry terminal. However, we've really strongly support local management of assets. And so, certainly in any capacity that we can, as a partner agency, support you in this effort and in expanding use and finishing out this plan. Good job.
Thanks, Joanne. Ryan, did you want to add anything?
Just a thank you, Michelle. I think that was a really informative presentation, and I really appreciate having all those maps available, and just wanted to echo for everyone that all those maps are available in more detail on the project website. And yeah, I think always supportive of more trails and more cabins for Juneau.
Great, thanks. Okay, I think we got everybody on the call or on the panel. So at this point, we'll just open up the questions and go through them. Looks like we've got a few in here. So yeah, we'll just go through them one by one. So first question is, or more of a comment, is Margaret Custer. She's the executive director of Southeast Alaska Land Trust, reminding us that they own a portion of the project area managed for public use. Actually we had a conversation the other day about that. There's a small portion right by the Montana Creek, the bridge, back loop road over Montana Creek. And actually, I didn't even realize, I had to look closely enough and realized it is in the project area. So I apologize for that, Margaret. But yes, they are an owner, and will continue. Margaret said she's interested in being involved in the process, which is great. There are other landowners that weren't mentioned, private landowners in the project area, smaller, mostly along that border of Black Loop Road. And really it's such a large project area that we're just looking for obvious borders, like to the kind of the northeast ridge lines, to the, Egan Drive. So again, think of it broad scale, probably not going to get down in this early stages to a lot of very detailed design. However, I think it's important to understand recognize all the public use areas, and also connections, because there are trails going through that area along Montana Creek. So thanks for your participation, Margaret. Okay, next question. Did you reach out to Audubon Society or other representation for non-consumptive users? So I don't believe Audubon Society was on that list. Again, we showed the list in the project, in the slideshow of everyone we reached out to specifically. So if you weren't on the call for that, the slideshow is now on our project webpage on Parks and Rec department page. So you can go see that. And I don't think Audubon Society was on that list, but we certainly would welcome their participation. So if you know someone, please reach out to them, let them know, and we can keep that in the forefront for moving forward. Thank you. Okay, so then, interesting. It says, thanks for the great presentation, Michelle. 2 questions. Oh, okay. I think I'm seeing one question. This is from Mike Hecker. So Mike, if there's another one and I don't answer it, add it again. But the question I see is, what is the elevation of the new parking at Lake Creek? So it's a concept right now, but it's about 200-ish foot elevation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. I just want to say it. Think of it as very much a concept. But we did talk to the Snowmobile Club because they've had this idea for a long time, and had thought of kind of an area that made sense from their use logistically, and to some extent, potentially in terms of the topography makes sense. Just to put it for people into perspective, it's about the top elevation of Mountainside community, and not quite as high as Blueberry Hill. But I will say that, you know, there is more snow at 200 feet. It's kind of amazing how that works, because it's not that high up. But it's rough, and it's just a general idea. And Mike, I'm sorry, I don't see your second question. So again, just add that at the end and we'll get to it. Let's see. Have you prioritized any of these proposals? No. Anything you see on the draft plan is draft and it's concept. We are not at a prioritization yet. We're at early stages of public input and design development. That is typically a later stage process. I will say though, we are working on adding parking this fall at the end of where the gate is on Montana Creek Road, because we did recognize there is a safety issue there. So we have a little bit on-street parking right by the Hank Harmon public range, and it's kind of like 90-degree off the street. We're going to be adding parking on the other side and hopefully extending some of that parking pending permits. And we're trying to get it done this fall so that we'll have some more parking for this winter season. That said, we think we need more parking in the long term, but that parking lot at the end of Montana Creek Road is just a concept at this point. Okay, let's see. Why was Montana Creek south of Loop Road to Mendenhall River excluded from planning process? That's Rick Harris. You know, it's a great question. Why didn't we include all the way down to Egan Drive and the Cax Trail area down Montana? It was the project started, as I explained in the beginning, as looking at some of the intense uses along Montana Creek Road at the end, and some of the proposal that came to us for that area in Spaulding Meadows and along that end part of Montana Creek Road and through that area. And so with meeting with the agencies, we kind of made this project area that made sense to us in terms of what we had been hearing from the community and allowing for connections. I definitely, it's connected hydrologically, it's connected by trails, the area you're talking about. And I think we can recognize that in the plan as making connections to that area, but at some point you also need to draw a line. So I don't know if that's good enough answer, but that's how it came about. Okay, so maybe you mentioned this, but will current trails like Peterson Lake Trail be updated, better maintained during this project? Yeah, good question, Gretchen. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the themes we heard was maintenance. I talked a little bit about durability of materials and sustainability of trails. We recognize and we heard a lot that the existing trails need reconstruction, maintenance. I talked a little bit about looking at the routing of current trails. We always do that with TrailMix when we maintain trails. Is this routed in a good way? Can we move it around away from creeks? Can we move it around wetlands? Can we route it? Is there better, less steep topography? So we will definitely look at that. And I think one of the values of master plans that go through a community process is when we hear that from the community, we put it on the plan, then we can get, we're better lined up for grant funding for those types of projects. Chris Myrtle, just to confirm, no motorized use in winter along Montana Creek. Motorized use is moved to new trail to the west. There's motorized use maps, I'm just going to say, that are on the webpage. If you go to Parks and Rec webpage, to the project page on the right, current projects, go to Montana Creek master plan, click that. And in there, you'll find the motorized use maps. They're complicated, but there's a winter map. Look at that. I'll answer what I think you're getting at. Right now on city land, Montana Creek Road extends to the end of city land. It's managed by DOT for a small section, and it turns into a trail over the creek. Motorized use is currently allowed in that section, summer and winter. And there's, in the plan, there's no proposed to change that. DNR allows motorized use. It's generally allowable use under certain conditions. So along the trail through DNR land, it's generally allowed. That's along Montana Creek. Once you get into Forest Service land, it is, there's certain conditions on it. It's complicated. I went through it in the plans, but it's when the ground is frozen, 12 inches of snow, certain types of vehicles are allowed in certain areas and aren't. Look at the plans. Chris, email me if you still don't understand. Thanks. Gary Mendeville, any data on historic snow depths on the proposed route of the non-motorized trail along Montana Creek? I do not personally have that. I haven't researched that as part of this project. It's an interesting idea, and I would love to hear more about what you're thinking. And if you, I don't know if you maybe have some knowledge, Gary, on that or some sources, but please email us at the email address. I'll put it back up at the screen at the end of the questions. So interesting and good ideas, and I'd like to learn more. So if you have any ideas, let me know, or at least put in a public comment on that. Thanks. John Neary, once master plan is final, what infrastructure would be prioritized that already is a CBJ or U.S. Forest Service priority? For example, better parking for Montana Creek Trail, but there are likely others. So I addressed that a little bit already in terms of priorities, and I mentioned the Montana Creek parking situation, and we are making, you know, the parking a priority now. As far as the larger parking area, you know, may end up being a priority. We just haven't gotten to that yet. We'll also have to gauge how the new parking works this winter. You know, does it really provide for the needs? Do we need more? So I think it'll be a little bit of watching and learning, and then going through this process and setting priorities. I don't know, does anyone from the Forest Service want to comment on that question?
Sure, I can start that off, and I'll let Pete weigh in too. The priorities will, I don't want to get too far out in front of it, because we will rely on the public comments both during the planning process, or the master planning process, and the NEPA process, as far as what gets prioritized. Also, we get funded in specific projects. So if cabins got prioritized, the cabin part of it may get move up the priority list, or if we get trail funding, then depending on if it's for new trails or for updating existing trails, that may make it a priority for us. Maintenance of the trails would probably be fairly high, all things considered.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tristan. I would say maintenance will be high on CBJ's list as well.
Yeah, and I'll let Pete weigh in too on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. No, I think that's great. And like Tristan said, a lot of it will depend on where the funding comes from. You know, we put in for a number of things every year, and not all of it gets funded. And sometimes we're surprised at what does get funded. Sometimes the funding is more than what we need. Not very often. More often than not, it's not enough. So every year we're constantly reevaluating what we have available. And, you know, like for Peterson, for example, we've put in a couple of times to ask for funding to be able to finish that trail, and it just hasn't come through yet. So that's a perfect example. But when you look at that master plan and all the things that could take place, it would take a number of years and a number of funding requests and cycles before a lot of that can take place. And a lot of that's going to be based off of the public comment. What do people want to see first? It wouldn't really make sense for us to build a brand new cabin right in the middle of a place that no one could access. So the trail is probably going to be one of the first things that we would focus on, and then making sure that those trails are sustainable and can meet all of the objectives that we're looking for, you know, for a wintertime use and for summertime use. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and sorry if I'm talking too much, other panelists, and you want to answer a question, please do butt in. Don't mean to be taking them all. Okay, great. So John Heifetz, do you anticipate user conflicts when cabins are accessible for motorized and non-motorized users? So the way I think of it is not so much as a conflict with the cabin use. I mean, I think cabin reservation systems work pretty well. But I think really thinking about trail design and just in the trail itself, but also in the layout, how the trail arrives to the destination, which would be the cabin, as well as regulations and clear signage for that. And I think that needs to be, as we've heard, a major part of any work that we do out there. And I think that will be key for people understanding use. So I do think that if we can do it well and we can do it right, we can really minimize those conflicts. And, you know, as we've seen with the trails we have now, there are user conflicts because the trails are not designed for multi-use. I mean, they're not really designed for anything. So, you know, some of them are old roads, and so really intelligently having a plan, which we're trying to do, and know who the users are and designing for that, I think is really critical and important. But if you have other ideas, John, on, you know, how to do it or what to do or the needs or the problems, please, you know, send that and comment. Thanks. Then I've heard the ski groomers say that hardened trails, compacted gravel, are the key to grooming through low snow conditions. The proposed non-motorized trail paralleling the existing Montana Creek Trail and multi-use trail through Spaulding Meadow proposed to have a hardened surface wide enough to groom. So, I mean, we definitely haven't gotten to design details on trails. I will say from my thoughts in listening to users, just sounds like you are as well, and maybe being a user yourself, is that for grooming and actually for motorized use, that hardening trails is really important. And so I would think that we would definitely look at that, and maybe not every trail, but access trails, like the important access trails that we're showing, I think would be important. And I'd love if Ryan, you want to talk about it, or anybody else on the panel has thoughts on that. I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've learned, like you said, Michelle, a lot of the trails that we have in Juneau are inherited from mining infrastructure, and were not necessarily planned with sustainability in mind. So I think when it comes to hardened surfaces, we almost always prefer to harden trails rather than have organic materials or slippery boardwalk. And, you know, I think it's definitely a more expensive option. And this plan doesn't speak to funding sources and how we're going to fund those things. So I think when it's possible, the funding sources, we almost always prefer to harden trails.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Okay, so maybe Mike Heckers, this might be the second question we missed before. So it says, also the 25-mile winter road will be an unimproved or improved trail to the new northern cabin. So will the summer version be improved or unimproved? So I think this is a little bit similar to the last question into kind of the design. How would we improve those trails? So there's the section of trail that exists, that's the road, and then I think you're talking about maybe the extension of that to the new northern cabin. And I would think that one would be really important to be hardened and improved, so that the summer version too, I mean, would benefit. Basically, summer and winter would benefit from hardening that trail. And that one, you know, the way we drew these trails were really a mapping paper exercise. It's not in the field. And that's much farther down the line when we would do that. So that is definitely, there's a couple challenging connections in there. And we looked at topography and some of the resource data on that GIS mapper, but that needs to be looked at a lot more. It's a concept line for sure, and we'd really have to get on the ground and figure out how those trails would work. Gretchen, thank you for the presentation. My family was on the trails last weekend and thoroughly enjoyed our overnight hike. Looking forward to new connecting trails and cabins. Okay, and then Chris Myrtle, I support an in-person public meeting and design session in the future, pandemic providing to further develop and refine the master planning effort. Great start. Thanks, Chris. It'd be great to get comments like this written, so send them to parks.rec@juno.org. Thanks. Gretchen, will the stream setbacks be adhered during trail design and development? So I think, the question is, will we follow stream setback during trail design and development? Yes, we do that during trail design and development. There's different setbacks in different scenarios. There's also stream crossings where you have to cross a trail. But like I said, we heard a lot about the environmental value of this area, high habitat value. So really looking carefully at how can we pull trails away from streams and riparian areas. And there is value in bringing a trail close. So being really deliberate about where do we, come for a viewing spot or for a crossing spot, but trying to get those linear trails that just run along the bank of a creek. We've seen that in other areas where that just promotes a lot of erosion. So really looking at how to, for existing trails, move trails away, and for new trails, designing a little bit better where they're not impacting the riparian edge of the creeks. Okay, great. Well, that's all the questions that we have at this time. I'm just going to open it up one more time to anybody else in the panel that wants to say anything before we end the meeting.
Thanks again, Michelle. You've done a great job. I too, now I'm not with DOT, I look forward to lots of new trails for mountain biking and skiing and cabins. So, and a public meeting will be great, a design charrette of some sorts. So thank you again, appreciate it.
Like I said earlier, thanks, Michelle. It's been a great presentation. Also, I agree with Chris. It'd be great to have a public meeting again, pandemic pending. And yeah, always looking for ways to support more cabins and more trails in Juneau. So yeah, happy to be a part of this and excited to see it move forward.
Yeah, likewise, want to extend the thanks out to everyone that's participated in this effort so far. And I just wanted to put forward the offer. Again, send by all means if you have written comments to that email that Michelle put out. But if you guys do have specific questions related to state land, feel free to look me up. You can find me, just Google my name, State Alaska Employee Directory, and feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to talk through any questions you might have.
Yep, and I would echo the great job, Michelle. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate all the participation from the attendees as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad to see this off the ground and running. So it's great. Timing is great with me coming into this job, and it's exciting to be a part of this process right from the get-go. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. So it's fun to look forward to. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. I'll just leave the screen on with the email address to send your public comments in through September 10th and the link for the project webpage. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Appreciate you being here. Bye.